Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. A bell tolls faintly. Its sound softened until it feels more like an echo than a call. You notice the streets are quiet, lined with stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The moonlight falls pale over broken columns, casting long shadows across deserted squares. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and a faint trace of smoke lingering from distant fires. This is the Middle Ages, long after the height of Rome, an age when once crowded cities grew silent. Their great forums and baths left to crumble under time and neglect. Why Roman cities were abandoned in the Middle Ages is not a single story, but many threads woven together, each one fading into silence. You don't need to follow every word. Just let the images drift softly, like fog over the river. You hear the crunch of frost beneath your steps. Feel the roughness of stone walls, seaweeds pushing through cracks where senators once walked. The flicker of a torch trembles in the wind, its glow touching faded carvings. Faces chiseled in marble that no longer watch over a bustling crowd. These places, once alive with voices, fell quiet as trade faltered, as roads grew empty, as life retreated to the countryside. The silence feels heavy, as though the walls themselves are still holding their breath. Candles flicker in the small chapels built within ruins, smoke curling slowly upward, carrying prayers into vast, hollow spaces. The smell of damp lingers, mingling with wax, while footsteps echo in halls that once rang with speeches and laughter. What was once a city became a shell, stone by stone surrendering to time. You don't need to hold on to every detail. Simply let the glow of firelight and the hush of broken streets settle gently in your thoughts. This was the fate of many Roman cities, not destroyed in a single night, but slowly abandoned, piece by piece, as the world around them changed. Their stones still stand, their silence still lingers, their shadows still stretch long beneath the moon. And as you wander through that silence, with bells fading, with torches trembling, with frost gathering on the stones, you may find yourself wondering, how does a city once filled with life fall so deeply into stillness until only echoes remain? Asterisk, you hear the sound first, not of voices, nor of chariots clattering, but of wind moving gently across stones that once bore sandals, boots, and wheels. It sighs through colonnades where marble has cracked, through arches where pigeons now nest, through streets once bright with sellers' cries. The silence is not sudden. It is the kind of hush that grows slowly, like ivy along a wall, creeping, steady, patient. You walk where Rome once gathered its people. Imagine the forum, a space of law, trade, and talk. In the height of empire, you would have heard debates, arguments, bargains. The air would have smelled of incense from nearby temples, of meat roasting in shops, of wool dyed in vats, sharp and pungent. But now, in the centuries after empire's fall, the same space carries emptiness. The stones remain, but their rhythm changed. Instead of footsteps, only echo. Instead of shouts, only breeze. Pause here. Let the silence settle, as though you were standing in a vast square where the sound of your own breathing feels louder than all else. You don't need to hold each detail. Just drift with the hush. As the 5th century turned, the Western Empire fractured. Rome's legions withdrew. Taxes failed. Granaries emptied. Without order, cities began to wither. Their aqueducts, marvels of stone, cracked when not maintained. Weeds pressed through mosaics. Rain seeped into roofs. Walls leaned. Ceilings fell. What once was bustle became slow crumble. The silence folded itself into stone. You smelled damp mortar, moss blooming where marble split, dust rising as shutters rot. These are the scents of decline, not sudden, but steady, like breath fading with time. And so, life that once drew thousands began to drift outward. Farmers returned to fields, merchants abandoned shops, senators left for villas. Cities remained standing, but emptier. Their soundscape narrowed to the low calls of crows, the bark of stray dogs, the whisper of wind. Pause again. Picture an amphitheater, once alive with cheers, with the roar of crowd, with trumpet calls and drum beats. In the Middle Ages, grass rises in its floor, goats graze, shepherds call, stones stripped, benches gone, silence reigning. You hear only the shuffle of hooves, the rustle of grass, if you're still listening. Notice how emptiness itself feels alive here. Not harsh, not sudden, but folded into space. You don't need to track each ruin. Let the sound of quiet itself drift, like smoke in cool air. Yet, even as silence grew, memory lingered. For those who lived in shadow of ruins, walls still loomed enormous. Aqueducts still arched across valleys. Baths still sprawled. To walk among them was to feel small, to sense past greater than present. Medieval chroniclers wrote of giants who must have built such things, their scale too vast for ordinary men. Silence carried DOX, folded into stone. And so, ruins became both quarry and temple, plundered for stone, yet revered for mystery. Pause once more. Imagine a monastery rising beside old baths. Monks chant, their voices low, their hands steady copying texts. Around them, stone from ruins used to build cloisters, arches, chapels. Yet nearby, the baths stand roofless, echoes vast, silence thick, the contrast sharp, the air heavy with incense on one side, moss and damp on the other. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself feels weighty here. Not gone, not clear, but folded into ruin. You don't need to recall each name. Let presence itself drift like mist against wall. This is how Roman cities faded, not by sudden collapse, not by fire alone, but by slow turning of time, by silence deepening each year. The Forum, the baths, the amphitheater all became places where life no longer gathered, but where echoes grew, and you are left with reflection drifting softly, like wind curling through empty colonnade at dusk. To those who walked among half-fallen walls, who prayed in chapels built of marble stripped from temples, who heard silence heavier than voice, feel they lived after greatness, or did they simply live within a world where asterisk stones whispered? Ruins loomed, and quiet, pressed like shadow, waiting always for dawn, yet never gone. Asterisk, you hear it faintly at first, the hollow creak of a wooden shutter swinging in the wind. No trader's voice follows, no coins clatter on a table, no barter rises above the hush. The marketplace, once the beating heart of the city, has grown strangely still, where once crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder, stalls spilling with olive oil, grain, pottery, and cloth. Only dust drifts now, curling in the sunlight. Pause here. Imagine yourself standing beneath a stone arch, the kind that once opened into bustling stalls. The ground under your feet is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, yet no footsteps sound now. Instead, you hear a crow cawing overhead, wings beating as it rises into the sky. The silence feels thicker than any wall, folding around you as though the city itself were holding its breath. You don't need to follow every detail. It's enough to drift with a hush, to notice how emptiness itself takes on a sound of its own. In Roman days, goods flowed across empire. Ships carried grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, spices from distant lands. Merchants filled markets with color and smell, baskets of figs, amphorae of oil, bolts of dyed fabric. Voices bargained, laughter rose, money exchanged. The scent of bread, fresh from ovens, mingled with sharp tank of fish. with sweetness of fruit, with dust of earth. But as empire fractured, so too did its trade. Roads grew unsafe, bridges crumbled, markets thinned. Ships no longer arrived with the same rhythm. Caravans broke, coins lost weight. Without trade, markets shrank. Without markets, cities lost their pulse. What was once lively folded into stillness. Pause again. Picture a stall abandoned, its roof of reed collapsing, jars toppled, bench empty. Grass grows between stones, ivy climbing posts. A single clay shard glints in dust, all else broken, all else gone. You bend to touch the shard. It feels cool, smooth, fragile. Around you, the silence presses. If you're still listening, notice how fragility itself feels steady here. Not rushed, not loud, but folded into stone. You don't need to follow each trade route. Let emptiness itself drift, like dust stirred by breeze. With fewer goods, fewer came. Citizens drifted to countryside, where land gave grain directly, where safety lay in villages, not in hollowed cities. Villas, once luxurious, became fortified. Villages clustered around churches, abbeys rose on hills. In this way, people did not vanish, but their rhythm shifted. Silence of city, balanced by murmur of field. And so, the city faded, while countryside thickened with life. Pause once more. Imagine fields beyond wall. You see smoke curling from cottages, hear voices calling, oxen pulling plow. Life gathers there, drawn from silence of form, folded into soil. Yet behind you, inside wall, city remains quiet. The contrast sharp, the air weighted with change. If you're still listening, notice how movement itself feels gentle here. Not sudden, not forced, but folded into time. You don't need to hold each reason. Let presence itself drift, like mist across a meadow. The economy of stone crumbled too. Cities once built with marble and brick, now stripped. Columns pulled down, temples broken, stones carried to build barns, chapels, fortresses. The city became its own quarry, its silence cut into blocks, carted away to raise new walls elsewhere. In ruins, children played. In rubble, goats grazed. The grandeur remained only in fragments, scattered in cottages and cloisters. And so, the great forum became pasture, the proud basilica became barn. Silent, deeper still. Pause again. Picture workers breaking wall. Their hammers strike, sparks fly, blocks fall. They load carts, oxen groan, wheels creak. They leave silence heavier, ruin emptier. In distance, a chapel rises, its arch of stone taken from Roman gate. You hear chant faintly, drifting in air that once held orators' cries. If you're still listening, notice how reuse itself feels layered here. Not loss, not gain, but folded into continuity. You don't need to trace each stone, let echo itself drift. Like bell carried on wind, by early Middle Ages, cities stood ghostly. Some shrank to small towns, their centers abandoned, their edges clinging with life. Others vanished, swallowed by weeds, their names lingering only in memory, in song, in half-remembered tales of greatness past. Where once tens of thousands thrived, only hundreds remained, their voices thin in vast silence. And so, the Roman city became shadow of itself, silence echoing where markets once roared. Pause once more. Imagine walking at dusk. The sun sets behind half-fallen wall, its light casting long shadows across broken stones. You hear your own steps, steady, soft. From far off, a bell tolls in monastery, faint yet steady. The silence presses close, not empty, but filled with echoes. If you're still listening, notice how dusk itself feels endless here. Not rushing, not fading, but folded into the horizon. You don't need to mark each ruin. Let stillness itself drift, like shadow stretching. This is how silence conquered market. Not by sudden fall, but but by slow unravel, by absence of ships, of coins, of voices. What once was center of empire's life became hollow, its echoes heavier than its walls, and you are left with reflection drifting softly, like twilight settling over deserted street. Did those who still lived among ruins, who tilled soil outside gates, who heard bells from chapels built of old stones, feel they lived an end of greatness, or did they simply feel air heavy with silence, folded into rhythm of days, waiting for centuries to pass, waiting for voices to rise again? Asterisk, you walk again through streets grown narrow with weeds. The silence holds steady, but listen closely. It is not a silence of emptiness alone. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a hammer striking, faint, irregular. Somewhere nearer, you catch the low bleating of goats. The Roman city is not entirely abandoned. A few remain, their lives woven into the ruins, their survival folded into silence itself. Pause here. Picture a single family in a half-falling insula, once a tall apartment block. The upper floors collapsed long ago, the stairways broken, but the lower rooms still hold. Inside, smoke rises from a hearth patched with old bricks. Children curl in straw, bread bakes in clay oven. Outside, goats graze among fallen columns. Chickens scratch where mosaics once gleamed. The city is not gone, but it is smaller, quieter, reshaped. You don't need to keep each image clear. Let them drift, as though you were moving slowly through haze, pausing only when silence folds closer. In many places, scavengers lived where senators once debated. They stripped lead from pipes, wood from beams, bronze from doors, coins found in cracks of pavement, pottery shards in soil, scraps of marble for tools. Ruins became quarry and shelter, both feared and needed. The smell was of damp, of smoke, of dung. The air hung heavy with memory, yet life still pressed forward, even here. And so, those who remained lived within shadow of greatness, their days folded into silence of stones. Pause again. Imagine monastery in heart of ruined city. Monks walk cloisters built from old columns, their chants rising softly in morning chill. Their hands copy texts on parchment, salvaging knowledge from libraries long decayed. Where once senators spoke, psalms now echo, the silence of form replaced by rhythm of prayer, the weight of empire by whisper of quill. If you're still listening, notice how continuity itself feels delicate here. Not strong, not vanished, but folded into breath. You don't need to follow each word of scripture. Let the scratch of quill itself drift, like wind moving through rafters. Sometimes wanderers found refuge too, merchants passing, soldiers without lords, pilgrims seeking shrines. They slept in arches roofless, lit fires in corners where frescoes still clung. Their voices rose for a night, then faded, leaving silence heavier still. Ruins became way stations, never homes, their echo endless. And so, the city held traces of life, but not its heart. Pause once more. Picture bathhouse, roof gone, floors cracked. Rain pools in cistern, frogs croak, moss spreads. In corner, family lives in chamber, once warm with water. Their fire smokes against wall. Children laugh faintly. Mother stirs pot. The silence is not empty here, but it is fragile. It's easily broken. If you're still listening, notice how fragility itself feels tender here. Not harsh, not final, but folded into hush. You don't need to keep each voice. Let warmth itself drift, like steam rising, then fading. For many, ruins carried fear. People whispered of spirits, of giants, of curses. Columns, towering, arches, vast walls, enormous, too large for ordinary hands, too strange for present age. They believed such cities built by peoples long vanished, perhaps not even human. So they approached with awe, with wariness, with silence deeper than reverence. And so, ruins became half sacred, half haunted, folded into memory of ages past. Pause again. Imagine shepherd guiding flock through amphitheater. He glances at arches, mutters prayer, crosses himself. His sheep scatter, bells tinkling, silence resettling. He leaves quickly, unwilling to linger beneath shadow of walls. The air smells of damp stone, of wool, of fear unspoken. If you're still listening, notice how awe itself feels quiet here. Not shouted, not explained, but folded into gesture. You don't need to entangle each fear. Let shadow itself drift, like cloud across hill. Yet, not all feared. Some saw opportunity. Stones pulled to build castles, cathedrals, cloisters, roads of empire repaved, aqueducts stripped, walls broken for lime. Ruins became lifeblood of new world, their silence fueling sound of hammers elsewhere. And so, Roman city gave way to medieval town, smaller, clustered, alive in different rhythm. Pause once more. Picture New Town by cathedral. Its houses timbered, its streets muddy, its market small. Beside it, old Roman gate still stands, stones, dark, arch, vast. People pass daily, glancing upward, never touching. Silence of past towers above bustle of present. If you're still listening, notice how layering itself feels deep here. Not simple, not flat, but folded into centuries. You don't need to hold each layer. Let echo itself drift, like bell across valley. This is how Roman cities were not simply abandoned, but transformed. They shifted from centers of empire to hushed landscapes of memory, from marketplaces to quarries, from forums to monasteries, from stone to soil. Those who remained lived among shadows, their silence heavy, their survival folded into ruins, and you are left with reflection drifting softly, like evening falling through roofless hall. Did those who warmed themselves by fires in baths once filled with water, who prayed in cloisters built from marble once meant for temples, who walked past arches too vast to understand, feel themselves small within greatness? Or did they simply live, folded into silence? Unaware, they carried echoes of Rome into Middle Ages. Asterisk, you hear it in rhythm, a hammer striking stone echoing through a hollowed street. The sound does not carry joy, nor the steady hum of building. Instead, it is the sound of dismantling, of walls broken, of columns toppled. The Roman city, once raised by legions, by masons, by slaves and architects, now undone stone by stone. Pause here. Imagine standing in a great basilica, roof already fallen, mosaics dulled, weeds curling along marble steps. A group of men climb ladders, striking capitals loose, prying marble from wall. Oxen wait outside, carts creak, rope strains. Each block carried not to rebuild the basilica, but to raise walls of castle, of cloister, of farmstead. The city feeds new life by its own decay. You don't need to follow every detail. Let the rhythm of the hammer itself drift, like a heartbeat fading slowly into hush. Roman stone was strong, its mortar lasting, its blocks cut with precision. But strong stone also tempted. Castles needed walls, churches needed arches, cottages needed hearths. Why quarry new when old stones waited, lying silent, ready? And so, throughout early Middle Ages, Roman cities became quarries, great walls pulled down to build villages, amphitheaters stripped for lime, aqueducts shattered for bridges. And so, what once was center of power became source of stone, silence folding into usefulness. Pause again. Picture a lime kiln on edge of ruin. Men gather fallen blocks, stack them high. Fire burns hot. Marble hisses, cracks, collapses into powder. The smell is acrid, smoke thick, air heavy. Powder carried away in sacks, spread onto mortar, used for walls elsewhere. The basilica loses columns. The monastery gains cloisters. The silence of ruin broken by hiss of fire, by sigh of stone. If you're still listening, notice how transformation itself feels endless here. Not cruel, not kind, but folded into time. You don't need to track each stone. let change itself drift, like smoke fading skyward. In some cities, statues still stood, their faces worn, their names forgotten. Bronze gleamed once, but bronze too was precious, melted for bells, for weapons, for hinges and clasps. Statues toppled, heads severed, metal reborn. Only fragments remained, a foot in soil, a hand in ditch. Silence heavier where form once towered, and so, Rome's memory carried not by monuments, but by fragments scattered across the land. Pause once more. Imagine square where a statue of emperor once rose. Its base still stands, inscription weathered, words unread. But above, nothing, only empty pedestal, pigeons nesting. A boy sits upon it, watching goats graze nearby. His world knows not emperor, nor Rome, only pasture, only present. The silence is both loss and life. If you're still listening, notice how absence itself feels weighty here. Not forgotten, not explained, but folded into gaze. You don't need to remember each emperor. Let emptiness itself drift like wind across stone. The process was not quick. For centuries, ruins stood half whole, their shells looming. Travelers wrote of vast arches, roofless halls, eerie emptiness. Some walls endured into later ages, absorbed into towns that grew slowly at their feet. But each generation took more, until grandeur gave way to fragments. The silence of loss stretched long, patient as moss. And so, ruin became part of life, its weight steady, its silence deep. Pause again. Picture farmer leading oxen past aqueduct. The arch is still high, their stones dark, their presence immense. He glances up, feels awe, yet breaks stone from base to mend his field wall. His plow carves soil as silence of ruin presses above. The contrast stark, yet natural to him. If you're still listening, notice how familiarity itself feels strange here. Not new, not ancient, but folded into day. You don't need to trace each field. Let rhythm itself drift, like oxen hooves, steady in earth. By time centuries passed, many Roman cities became indistinct. Their names shifted, their outlines blurred. Forests grew where forms stood, rivers changed course, marshes spread. To walk among them was to feel both past and present layered, silence deeper than memory, and you were left with reflection drifting softly, like evening settling on broken arch. To those who pried marble from walls, who melted statues, who led oxen past ruined sense they were ending empire, or did they feel only need, only hunger, only work folded into silence? Unaware, they were reshaping stone of greatness into walls of their own lives. Asterisk, you hear the sound of water first. It drips steadily, drop by drop, from a roofless vault, where once marble ceilings shone with mosaics of gods and heroes. Now only sky peers through, and rain runs slow along cracks, seeping into stone. Birds flutter where frescoes once glowed. Ivy curls along wall, roots dig deep into mortar. The city does not collapse in a single night, but dissolves gently, slowly, as nature reclaims what hands once built. Pause here. Imagine a Roman road. Its stones are worn, edges crumbling, grass pressing between joints. Centuries ago, carts rumbled here, soldiers marched, merchants sang. Now, only silence stretches. A deer crosses cautiously, its hooves clicking faintly. A fox follows at dusk, the air carrying smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. You stand there, hearing only rustle of wind through weeds. You don't have to remember each road or each stone. It is enough to drift with a hush, to notice how stillness itself grows steady as time folds in. The aqueducts, too, gave way. Where arches once carried water across valleys, now birds nested, vines hung, moss thickened. Some collapsed into heaps of rubble. Others stood half whole, rising like skeletons against horizon. The trickle of water ceased, but sound of wind remained, whistling through gaps, folding into silence. And so, the marvel of Roman engineering became habitat for owls, for swallows, for ivy thick as curtain. Pause again. Picture a family walking beneath aqueduct. They lead sheep a long trail, their voices low, their steps steady. Children glance upward, eyes wide, whispered tales of giants who must have built such towers. The arches glow in dusk, vast and silent. The sheep bleat, bells ring faint. Silence folds close again. If you're still listening, notice how awe itself feels hushed here. Not loud, not explained, but folded into gaze. You don't need to follow each arch. Let wonder itself drift, like mist between stones. Bathhouses, once alive with steam and laughter, grew still. Pools dried, floors cracked, walls sagged. Frogs leaped into rainwater gathered in corners. Reeds pressed through tiles. What was once a place of warmth became damp, chill, silent. A shepherd rested here. A traveler lit fire, smoke curling against ruined vault. The scent was not incense or oil, but moss, mildew, wet ash dot, and so comfort gave way to ruin. Silence spreading into space once filled with voices. Pause once more. Imagine yourself stepping into empty hall. Your footsteps echo, faint and hollow. You brush moss from wall, feel cool, damp beneath your hand. Above, a bird darts, startled by your presence. The silence feels alive, not empty, but filled with small sounds of water. Wing, leaf. If you're still listening, notice how silence itself feels textured here. Not flat, not void, but folded into sound of life. You don't need to remember each ruin. Let atmosphere itself drift like dew on stone. Forests crept closer, where walls crumbled, trees rooted. Oaks grew where markets once spread. Birches sprouted in amphitheaters. Vines wove across gates. Wolves padded through streets. Boars rooted in gardens. Owls nested in towers. At night, the city that once glowed with lamps and torches now darkened. Its only lights, the eyes of animals. Its only voices, their calls. And so, stone yielded to wood, echo yielded to rustle, empire yielded to earth. Pause again. Picture moonlight on ruined form. Stones, silver, weeds, dark, and owl hoots, wings, whisper. You stand in center, breath visible in cool night. Once, thousands pressed here. Now, only you, the moon, the silence. The air smells of damp grass, of crumbled lime, of a night itself. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels slower here. Not rushing, not ending, but folded into cycles. You don't need to carry each image. Let stillness itself drift, like moon across sky. In marshlands, rivers shifted course. Bridges once proud sank into silt. Their arches broken, their piles swallowed. Streets flooded, weeds grew, frogs croaked. Children fished where chariots once rolled, casting lines into water pulled between broken stones. The silence of empire lay beneath a ripple of water. And so, what once was road became stream. What once was forum became pond. Pause once more. Imagine boy crouched beside flooded street. He throws stone into water, ripples spreading, reflecting sky. His laughter faint, then silence again. The city holds both ruin and play, both memory and new life. The air smells of algae, of wet clay, of reeds bending. If you're still listening, notice how renewal itself feels soft here. Not triumphant, not mournful, but folded into rhythm. You don't need to hold each transformation. Let water itself drift, like ripples fading by centuries turn. Much of Roman city lay hidden beneath roots, beneath soil, beneath silence. Only fragments rose, a tower, an arch, a wall half buried. Travelers came, stared, wrote of strange ruins, covered in vines, silent and vast. They felt awe, they felt fear, they felt time's weight. For those who lived nearby, the ruins were simply part of landscape, as natural as hill or forest. And so, Rome's grandeur dissolved into earth. Its silence folded into nature's breath, and you are left with reflection drifting softly, like wind moving through forested wall. To those who gathered wood in amphitheaters, who grazed sheep beside aqueducts, who fished in flooded streets, since they lived in ruins of empire? Or did they feel only soil beneath feet, water in hand, silence around them, folded into a world that no longer remembered, yet never truly forgot? Asterisk, you hear footsteps, but not your own. They echo faintly through broken arches, though no one walks there now. The sound comes from imagination itself, for ruins carry presence, even in silence. Medieval people who lived near old Roman cities often spoke of them with awe, with fear, with wonder. To them, the stones themselves whispered. Pause here. Imagine twilight in a ruined forum. The light fades slowly. Shadows stretch long. Birds dart overhead, their wings cutting the air. In the stillness, each sound feels amplified. The rustle of grass, the creak of branch, the low sigh of wind through arch. You stand there, and silence feels alive, almost watching. You don't have to keep each detail sharp. It is enough to drift with the sensation, to let atmosphere carry you, soft and steady. For those in Middle Ages, the ruins of Rome were not simply abandoned spaces. They were mysteries. Who had built such walls? Who carved stones so vast? Few believed ordinary men had done so. Instead, stories grew of giants, of races long vanished, of powers lost. To walk among ruins was to step into otherworld, where past and present blurred. And so, silence became haunting, folded into myth. Pause again. Picture shepherd guiding flock past amphitheater. As dusk falls, he hurries, whispering prayer, for he has heard tales, ghosts walking beneath arches, voices of dead emperors, lights flickering in chambers long roofless. His sheep bleat nervously, bells clink. Silence folds in again. If you're still listening, notice how fear itself feels hushed here. Not loud, not chaotic, but folded into breath. You don't need to follow each story. Let the mood itself drift, like fog around stones. In churches, priests sometimes warned against ruins, calling them pagan, dangerous places of temptation. Old temples carried carvings of gods now condemned, statues broken but still unsettling. People crossed themselves passing, murmured blessings, avoided at night. Yet at same time, monks ventured in, seeking marble, using stones to build chapels. The ruins were both feared and needed, sacred and profane. And so, silence carried contradiction, folded into daily life. Pause once more. Imagine monk carrying torch through old basilica. His sandals scrape, flame flickers, shadows leap. He searches not for spirits, but for stone, prying loose blocks to carry back to abbey. Yet as he walks, he feels weight of presence, the silence pressing close. The air smells of damp and soot, of wax melting. If you're still listening, notice how reverence itself feels quiet here, not commanded, not denied, but folded into step. You don't need to decide belief. Let atmosphere itself drift, like flame unsteady. Travelers wrote of ruins too. Pilgrims on road to shrines often passed broken cities, marveling at their scale. They described arches taller than trees, walls broader than streets, carvings intricate though worn. Some believed they were works of Solomon or of peoples before flood. To see such ruins was to feel small, to sense time vast. And so, silence became teaching, folded into imagination. Pause again. Picture pilgrim pausing at aqueduct. He leans on staff, gazes upward. The arch towers, its top broken, weeds trailing. He shakes his head, marvels, whispers prayer. Then he walks on, leaving silence unchanged. The air smells of dust, of wildflowers, of age itself. If you're still listening, Notice how wonder itself feels soft here. Not fleeting, not sharp, but folded into gaze. You don't need to hold each word. Let all itself drift. Like wind, along arched our children grew with tales. Parents told them giants had built cities, that voices lingered in stones. Some dared play among ruins, daring each other to enter dark chambers, to climb walls, to touch carvings. Laughter echoed, then faded, leaving silence deeper still. And so, ruins lived in memory not only as past, but as story folded into childhood. Pause once more. Imagine children running through a half-collapsed bathhouse. Their laughter rings, bouncing off walls. They chase, they stumble, they vanish into arches. For a moment, ruins feel alive. Then they leave, and silence settles heavier. The air smells of dust stirred, of moss disturbed. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself feels layered here. Not gone, not lasting, but folded into sound. You don't need to keep each laugh. Let echo itself drift. Like ripple, fading dot by later Middle Ages, ruins dotted landscape, their meanings shifting. Some became fortresses, others quarries, others simply wilderness. But in all, silence carried presence, not empty, but filled with echoes of past and fears of present. Medieval people lived not apart from ruins, but within their shadow, their silence part of rhythm of life. And you are left with reflection drifting softly, like night falling through broken colonnade. Did those who whispered of giants, who prayed past in temples, who played among broken arches, sense they lived in world after greatness? Or did they feel only weight of silence pressing close, folded into story, folded into time itself? Asterisk, you hear bells again, though softer now. Not the clang of iron on stone in crowded forum, but the steady toll of bronze ringing across a valley. The sound drifts over fields, through mist, carried by morning air. Villagers pause, listening. Children stop their play. Oxen halt, mid-plow. Even birds seem to rest a moment as the note hums above. This was the rhythm that replaced Rome's bustle. Not markets at every corner, not aqueducts rushing water to fountains, but bells marking time in monasteries and manor halls. Pause here. Picture monastery rising at edge of fields. Its walls thick, its roof tiled, its cloisters enclosing square of green. Smoke curls from kitchen, chants rise from chapel. Silence folds within library. Around it cluster cottages, barns, sheep pens. People look to its tower for guidance, for shelter, for measure of time. You don't need to hold each brick or beam. Let sense itself drift, like incense curling upward in chapel stillness. Why did monasteries draw life? Partly because they endured. While cities crumbled, monks repaired walls, guarded fields, stored grain. They copied texts, preserving memory of past, while feeding hungry at gate. To enter monastery was to find order amid chaos, safety amid war, silence amid noise. For those in countryside, it became anchor, spiritual and practical. And so, where Rome once held power, monasteries now gathered people. Pause again. Imagine scriptoria, the writing rooms. You hear quills scratching across parchment, steady, rhythmic, endless. Candles flicker, wax dripping, shadows long. Monks bend over pages, letters unfolding, Latin preserved. Outside, rain taps on roof, wind rattles shutters. The silence here is not empty, but rich with memory. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm itself feels slow here. Not rushed, not loud, but folded into centuries. You don't need to follow each text. Let the sound of quill itself drift like rain on stone. Beside monasteries rose manorial estates. These two gathered life, though differently. A manor was Lord's Hall, wooden or stone, standing above village fields. Their peasants worked land, owing service, giving grain, tending flocks. The hall gave protection, sometimes harsh, but steady. When raiders threatened, villagers crowded within its walls. seeking refuge. The manor became center, not of prayer, but of power. And so, life turned around lord and monk, not magistrate and senator. Pause once more. Picture Manor Hall at night. Torches crackle, smoke curling against beams. A fire glows on hearth. Shadows dance across walls hung with hides. At table sits Lord, his family, retainers. Below, servants carry dishes, bread, ale. Outside, wind moans, wolves howl beyond hedge. The silence of night presses close, broken only by laughter, by clatter of cups, by creak of beams. If you're still listening, notice how presence itself feels weighty here. Not fleeting, not bright, but folded into structure of life. You don't need to track each voice. Let hush itself drift, like smoke rising. The manus fields stretched outward, divided into strips. Each family worked their share, bound by seasons, by soil, by obligation. Taxes paid, in grain, in labor, in service. To plow was not just survival, but duty. And yet, in return, came shelter, a place and circle of protection. The monastery to bound people. Tithes given, labor shared, prayers offered. But here, the rhythm was slower, steadier, tied to liturgy, to feast days, to calendar of saints. The silence was deeper, folded into chant, into meditation. Together, manor and monastery, they replaced city, where once stood basilicas, baths, theaters, forums. Now, rose halls, churches, cloisters. The scale smaller, but the ties stronger, woven into daily life. Pause again. Imagine feast day in village beside monastery. Bells peal, voices rise and hymn. Candles flicker inside chapel. Incense curls upward. Outside, tables set with bread, with cheese, with ale. Children laugh, dogs bark, musicians play pipes. Night comes, torches lit, songs sung. Silence folded into joy. If you're still listening, notice how even celebration feels calm here. Not frantic, not fleeting, but folded into rhythm of faith. You don't need to hold each sound. Let music itself drift, like echoes fading in night. Why did this shift matter? Because it reshaped Europe. From cities to countryside, from empire to manor, from magistrate to monk. Authority moved inward, local, personal. People trusted Lord's hall, monk's prayer, not distant emperor, not broken senate. The silence of empire replaced by murmur of village, chant of cloister, toll of bell. And so, the new order was not grand, but grounded. Pause once more. Picture winter morning at monastery. Snow drifts against wall. Bells toll faint through frost. Inside, monks chant, breath rising in cold air. Fire crackles in hearth. Bread bakes in oven. Beyond walls, peasants huddle in cottages. Roofs heavy with snow. The silence is thick, broken only by bell, by chant, by crackle of fire. If you're still listening, notice how cold itself feels steady here. Not cruel, not sharp, but folded into endurance. You don't need to trace each shiver. Let warmth itself drift, like embers glowing dot. By 10th century, most who once lived in Roman towns were bound to soil of manor or faith of monastery. Cities lingered as shadows, their stones quarried, their arches crumbled. Yet life did not vanish. It shifted, settled, endured, and in fields, in halls, in cloisters. New Europe was born, and you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved. Like twilight over field, did those who plowed strips beside monasteries, who prayed beneath bells, who sought safety in manor hall, know they had left behind empire? Or did they simply feel soil beneath hands? Bread in mouth, silence of bells pressing, folded into life, steady, endless, quiet as seasons. Asterisk, you hear wind moving through trees now, not through marble colonnades. Leaves rustle, branches sway, trunks creak under weight of time. The forest presses close, darker than any Roman street. thicker than any forum. Paths thread through undergrowth, damp and narrow, where carts struggle and travelers whisper prayers. And so, where once cities opened broad avenues, forests closed in, reclaiming land, folding silence over stone. Pause here. Smell moss, damp earth, fallen leaves. Hear birds calling, wolves howling, streams trickling unseen. The forest was not merely background. It was barrier, resource, shelter, threat. For those living in Middle Ages, woods replaced markets. They gave firewood, timber, game, berries, but they also hid bandits, spirits, dangers. Life turned from city's order to forest's mystery. You don't need to hold each detail. Let sound of rustle itself drift, like wind, sighing through branches. Castles rose at edge of this wilderness, not shining marble, but gray stone, rough-hewn, thick-walled. They guarded passes, watched rivers, anchored villages. Within their walls lived lords, soldiers, servants. Beyond spread fields, cleared from forest, rested from silence. Each castle became a new city center, though small, though harsh. People gathered beneath its tower, offering labor, seeking shelter. Pause again. Picture castle at dusk. Torches flare on battlements. Shadows stretch long across fields. Smoke curls from chimneys. Dogs bark in yard. Soldiers pace walls. Inside, a hall glows with fire. Benches crowded with retainers. Bread and ale set on boards. Outside, wind carries scent of pine. Chill of night. Silence of forest folding close. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm slows here. Not hurried, not bright, but folded into stone itself. You don't need to follow every sound. Let fire crackle itself, drift like embers glowing. Villages clustered near castles, each with cottages of wood and thatch, each with strips of field stretching outward. Chickens scratched in yards, pigs rooted in forest edge. Oxen pulled plows through soil heavy with stone. Life measured by sun, by bell, by lord's demand. And in these villages, people forged bonds tighter than city ever knew, bound by soil, by kinship. High fear of hunger, forests pressed close, always near. Even when fields cleared, woods loomed at horizon. And in these woods lived more than animals. Legends told of spirits, of outlaws, of hermits who fled cities, fall, and chose silence. Fires flickered in clearings, voices murmured in shadows. The forest was both gift and terror, endless and enclosing. Pause once more. Picture a winter night in village. Snow drifts heavy, roofs sag under weight. Fires crackle in hearths, smoke seeps through thatch. Outside, forest dark, silence deep, wolves pacing at edge. Inside, families huddle close, sharing bread, telling tales. Candles flicker, shadows dance on beams. Children fall asleep to rhythm of story, twash of wind. If you're still listening, notice how silence feels heavy here. Not empty, not harsh, but folded into breath itself. You don't need to follow every word. Let hush itself drift. It's like snow falling unseen. Over time, forests thinned, villages grew, castles multiplied. Yet cities, as Rome had known, remained abandoned. Their stones carted away, their arches toppled, their theaters roofless. People no longer needed wide avenues or marble baths. They needed walls, fields, fires, bells, and so urban life shrank, not vanished, but reshaped into patchwork of halls, cloisters, cottages. The silence of empire became the murmur of village. The grandeur of Rome became the endurance of manor. The stone of forum became foundation of castle. The shift was complete, from civic life to feudal life, from empire's order to medieval survival. Pause again. Imagine ruins of Roman city by 11th century. Grass grows through cracked streets. Goats wander among columns. Ivy climbs arches. Villagers pass, gathering stones to build cottages. Children play in shadow of amphitheater, no longer stage for actors, but pasture for sheep. The silence is thick, broken only by bleeding, by wind. If you're still listening, notice how ruins feel timeless here. Not forgotten, not mourned, but folded into daily use. You don't need to recall each arch. Let stillness itself drift, like ivy climbing wall. The church, 2 rows among ruins. Many basilicas became cathedrals, their stones reused, their walls reshaped. Within them, candles burned, incense curled, choirs sang. They offered continuity, memory of Rome's faith, reshaped for Middle Ages. And so, amid collapse, something endured by 12th century. Castles, dotted hills, monasteries filled valleys, villages laced rivers, forests retreated slowly, though always near. And old Roman cities remained shells, silent, waiting centuries until trade revived, until markets returned, until new life stirred. But for long ages, the land was not city-centered, but rural, feudal, cloistered, bound by soil and silence. Pause once more. Picture dawn breaking over a castle village. Mist clings to fields. Bells toll from chapel. Roosters crow. Smoke rises from chimneys. Children stir. Oxen led to plow. Monks chant within cloister. Lord rides out to hunt. The silence of night fades, replaced by rhythm of day. And yet always, behind, the echo of Rome lingers, faint as whisper, soft as breath. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels slower here, not measured by empire's decree, but by seasons, by bells, by breath. You don't need to keep each moment. Let flow itself drift, like river winding, and you are left with question, soft and unresolved, like twilight over fields, to those who lived in cottages by castles, who plowed strips, who feared wolves and prayed in chapels. No, they walked among ruins of empire. Or did they simply feel soil beneath hands, smoke in lungs, silence of bells pressing close, endless, steady, folded into centuries of quiet? Asterisk, you hear footsteps again, though faint. Not the heavy tread of legions, not the bustling shuffle of foreign crowds, but the soft scuff of leather shoes across stones, cracked and worn. The sound echoes strangely, as if walls are hollow, as if arches remember, but no longer resound. The city lies half empty, its silence deep, its streets lined with ruins. Yet, here and there, you see stalls rising, fabrics spread, baskets placed, voices murmuring. Pause here. Smell bread baking on corner hearth. Hear bleating of goats tethered in square. Feel damp moss creeping over fallen columns. The ruins are not deserted. They are reused, repurposed. The grandeur of Rome is gone, yet fragments serve. A marble slab becomes table. A broken statue base supports a stall. Ruined bathhouse houses market beneath open sky. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels layered here. Old empire fading, new life stirring. You don't need to keep each detail. Let echo itself drift, like wind sighing through arches. In early Middle Ages, most Roman cities were shadows. Their populations shrank, sometimes 2 handfuls, sometimes to none. Streets became pasture, forums turned to fields, amphitheaters filled with huts. Yet, life lingered, faint as ember. Traders passed, pilgrims stopped, lords claimed ruins for castles. Slowly, over centuries, ruins gathered life again, fragile at first, then stronger. And so, city did not vanish forever. It slept, waiting. Pause again. Picture 10th century morning. Mist clings to crumbled walls. Bells tolled from small church built within old basilica. Few houses cluster near, timber and thatch. Smoke rising. In square, a handful of stalls stand. Salt, wool, grain. Voices murmur, haggling softly. Children chase chickens among broken columns. Dogs bark, horses stamp. The silence of ruin is pierced, not loudly, but steadily. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm feels fragile here. Not grand, not secure, but folded into survival. You don't need to hold each voice. Let hush itself drift, like smoke curling upward. What stirred this renewal? Trade, pilgrimage, power. By 11th century, merchants crossed Europe, carrying salt, spices, cloth, wine. Pilgrims traveled to shrines, needing inns, markets, guides. Lords sought tolls, bishops sought influence, kings sought taxes. And so, ruins revived, not as Rome, but as new towns, new centers, smaller, humbler, yet growing. Markets first, weekly fairs, then annual gatherings where villagers brought surplus. Merchants spread wares, musicians played, jugglers performed. A city could begin from market alone, from steady return of trade, from presence of people. Around markets, rows, walls, chapels, guild halls. Slowly, ruins filled again. Pause once more. Imagine feast day fair in ruined city. Tents rise among broken arches. Stalls crowd square. Smells of roasting meat, of ale, of herbs. Sounds of laughter, bargaining, song. Candles flicker as night falls. Torches, light stalls. Shadows stretch across stones, once silent. The city breathes again, softly, tentatively. If you're still listening, notice how sound layers itself here. Silence beneath, voices above. You don't need to follow each bargain. Let murmur itself drift, like waves lapping shore. But revival was uneven. Some cities never returned, their stones quarried, their names forgotten. Others thrived, becoming medieval centers of trade, of craft, of learning. Paris grew, London revived, Cologne flourished, Venice rose. Their roots Roman, their shapes medieval. Narrow streets wound among ruins. Timber houses leaned against old walls. Cathedrals rose where temples had stood. The silence of empire was never fully broken, but transformed. New cities hummed differently, less ordered, more crowded, alive with guilds, with bells, with markets. They grew not from decree, but from need, from trade, from faith. Pause again. Picture 12th century Paris. The Seine flows dark, boats bobbing, voices calling, bridges crowded with shops, streets narrow, busy, candles flicker in windows, bells toll from cathedral rising. Smoke hangs over rooftops, children run, merchants shout. The city breathes fully now, no longer shadow, but presence. And yet beneath, old Roman stones remain, foundations hidden, silent. If you're still listening, notice how layers feel endless here. Past folded beneath present, silence beneath noise. You don't need to trace each layer, let flow itself drift, like river winding through time. Monasteries help too. Where they stood, towns grew. Pilgrims came, craftsmen followed, markets formed, castles drew people likewise. Villages gathered, trade settled, towns grew. Slowly, Europe shifted again, from countryside back to towns, from scattered villages to clustered markets, from silence to murmur. Yet cities never returned to Roman form. Their streets narrow, their houses timber, their order irregular. They grew by need, not plan. They bustled, yet never shone with empire's marble. Their beauty was different. Gothic spires, bustling squares, crowded bridges. Their silence was different. Bells tolling, guilds meeting, processions chanting. Pause once more. Picture a guild procession. Candles flicker, incense curls, voices chant in unison. Streets crowded, children watching, bells ringing. The air thick with smoke, with song, with devotion. And beneath feet, stones of old Roman street remain, silent, unseen, carrying weight of time. If you're still listening, notice how continuity itself feels calm here. Not sharp, not loud, but folded into centuries. You don't need to recall each stone. Let chant itself drift, like candle smoke dissolving. And so the story turns, from abandonment to renewal, From ruin to market, from silence to murmur, the medieval town rose, fragile yet steady, humble yet enduring. It carried memory of empire, but lived in rhythm of trade, of bell, of prayer, and you were left with reflection, soft and unresolved. Like evening over marketplace, did those who spread cloth upon ruined stones, who sold grain beside broken arches, who prayed in chapels built of reused marble, no, they revived city, or did they simply feel bread in hand, coin in palm, smoke in lungs, silence of bells, pressing close, endless, steady, folded into centuries of change. Asterisk, you hear bells again, louder this time, not from solitary monastery, but from clustered towers, rising above crowded streets. The notes ripple over rooftops, echoing through alleys, bouncing across bridges. They call to prayer, to market, to meeting. The sound is no longer faint, no longer lonely. The city breathes again, fuller, denser, alive. Pause here. Picture smoke rising from chimneys, thicker now, curling against spires. Smell bread baking in crowded lanes. Hear hammers striking iron, looms thudding in workshops. Timber houses lean close, upper stories nearly touching above narrow streets. Children dart between stalls. Dogs bark, carts creak. The silence of ruins is replaced by clamor of life. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere feels layered here. Not simple, not quiet, but folded with noise upon noise. You don't have to follow each sound. Let hum itself drift, like tide surging steadily. By the 12th century, many towns of Europe thrived again. Paris, London, Cologne, Venice, Bruges, names, once whispered faintly, now hummed loudly. Their walls expanded, their bridges crowded, their markets overflowing. They became centers, not of empire, but of craft, of guild, of cathedral. Guilds bound life. In each city, craftsmen joined together. Weavers, bakers, smiths, masons. They shared tools, defended rights, guarded secrets. Guild halls rose, sturdy timber or stone. Banners hung from windows, candles burning within. To belong was safety, identity, pride. For apprentices, it was path to trade. For masters, it was power. For city, it was rhythm. Pause again. Imagine guild feast. Long tables crowded, candles flickering, bread and meat piled high, voices loud, mugs clinking, laughter echoing. Outside, night presses, rain patters on shutters, dogs howl faintly in distance. Inside, warmth glows, shadows dance, silence forgotten. If you're still listening, notice how presence itself feels heavy here. Not fleeting, not bright, but folded into fellowship. You don't need to track each laugh. Let warmth itself drift like fire crackling. Above all, cathedrals define cities. Rising spires, endless arches, walls of stone, carved with saints and stories. They took centuries to build, each generation adding each stone laid with care. Their bells tolled far, their windows glowed, their vaults soared. They were not Roman, yet they carried weight of memory, grandeur of new age. Pause once more. Picture inside cathedral at dawn. Candles flicker against columns, incense curls upward, choir voices swell, echoing in vaults. Sunlight filters through colored glass, painting floor in red and blue. Silence folds beneath sound, deep, reverent, endless. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels slower here, not measured by empire's law, but by chant, by prayer. You don't need to remember each stone. Let echo itself drift, like incense rising unseen. Markets still pulsed. Weekly fairs, great annual gatherings, merchants from far lands, Italy, Flanders, Levant, cloth spread, spices weighed, coins exchanged. Cities grew rich, not by conquest, but by trade. Bridges crowded, docks filled, warehouses rose. Life was noisy, busy, vibrant, Yet, beneath it all, ruins of Rome lingered, silent foundations hidden. And so, medieval cities were both new and old, their roots deep, their branches reaching. Pause again. Picture Venetian market by canals. Boats bump, voices call, fabrics flutter, spices scent air. Bells toll from campanile, pigeons wheel overhead. Water laps against stone, gondolas sway, merchants bargain. The silence of abandonment is gone. Only murmur of trade remains. If you're still listening, notice how flow itself feels endless here. Not sharp, not abrupt, but folded into current of water, into hum of voices. You don't have to hold each bargain. Let murmur itself drift, like tide washing stone. Yet danger lingered. Fires swept timber houses, plagues stalked crowded lanes, hunger haunted poor. Cities thrived, but precariously. They could grow, but they could burn. They could trade, but they could starve. People endured, as always, between hope and fear, and in silence of night. When bells ceased, when markets closed, when streets emptied, ruins still whispered beneath. Old Roman walls lay hidden in basements, old stones reused in churches, old roads beneath new cobbles. Memory lingered, faint, folded beneath layers of life. Pause once more. Picture midnight in medieval city. Streets empty, shutters closed, torches flicker faintly. Dogs prowl, wind moans through alleys, bells toll softly. The silence here is not empty, but watchful, folded into stone, into shadow. If you're still listening, notice how stillness feels deeper here. Not forgotten, not erased, but folded beneath clamor. You don't have to follow each shadow. Let hush itself drift, like smoke dissolving in air. And so, Roman cities, once abandoned, now breathed again, though differently. They no longer shone with empire's marble. They bustled with timber, with trade, with prayer. They no longer marched to decree of emperor. They moved to rhythm of guild, of market, of bell. And you were left with reflection, soft and unresolved, like twilight over spires. Did those who wove cloth in narrow lanes, who prayed beneath soaring arches, who bargained in crowded markets. No, they stood atop ruins of empire. Or did they simply feel bread in hand, coin in palm, smoke in lungs? Silence of bells, pressing close, steady, endless, folded into centuries of change. Asterisk, you hear wheels on cobblestones, iron-rimmed and heavy, rolling slowly beneath weight of goods. The sound echoes in narrow lanes, bouncing off timbered walls leaning overhead. Merchants call out, voices layering with laughter, with dogs barking, with bells tolling. The city hums, not Rome's order, but medieval rhythm, pausing with trade, with faith, with daily need. Pause here. Smell spices carried from far seas, cinnamon, pepper, saffron. Here, clang of blacksmith, looms steady thud, clatter of hooves on stone. Sea banners flutter above guild halls, painted signs swaying in wind. The silence of ruins is gone. The murmur of networks grows. If you're still listening, notice how hum itself feels steady here, not fleeting, not sharp, but folded into daily life. You don't need to keep each sound. Let flow itself drift, like river running through stone. By 13th century, cities linked across Europe. Merchants traveled between them, carrying cloth from Flanders, salt from the Rhine, wine from Burgundy, grain from Baltic, spices from Levant. Routes crossed rivers, seas, mountains. Markets tied to fairs, fairs to ports, ports to caravans. The map filled with webs. Cities, no longer islands, but threads in larger loom. And so, medieval Europe turned outward again. Pause again. Picture great fair of Champagne. Tents stretch across fields. Merchants gather. Horses stamp. Voices roar. Fabrics unfurl. Coins clink. Candles burn through night. Fires glow. Smoke curls. Shadows sway. The silence of countryside is gone. The hum of exchange fills air. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm feels endless here. Not rushed, not jagged, but folded into repetition. You don't need to follow each bargain. Let murmur itself drift, like tide surging against shore. Power to shift it. Cities bargained with kings, with lords, with bishops. Charters granted freedoms, rights to trade, to govern, to judge. Councils formed, citizens elected, guilds spoke, parliaments stirred. Slowly, cities claimed voice, shaping kingdoms, guiding crowns. The silence of subservience gave way to murmur of negotiation. Pause once more. Picture council hall. Candles flicker against carved beams. Parchments spread, quills scratch. Voices debate, murmuring low, measured. Outside, bells, tolls, market hums, children play. Inside, silence deep, broken only by steady speech. If you're still listening, notice how time feels layered here. Not abrupt, not fleeting, but folded into parchment, into word. You don't have to remember each charter. Let quill itself drift, like ink spreading. Cathedrals crowned these cities. Taller, higher, brighter. Spires reached sky, windows blazed, vaults soared. They were symbols of power, of pride, of devotion. Cities competed, raising ever greater churches, ever taller towers. Faith-bound, yet rivalry stirred. The silence of ruin replaced by chorus of bells, of chants, of song. Pause again. Picture evening vespers. Choir voices rise, echoing through stone. Candles flicker, incense drifts, shadows stretch. Outside, streets hush, listening. The silence is reverent, endless. If you're still listening, notice how stillness feels rich here. Not empty, not forgotten, but folded into prayer. You don't need to follow each psalm. Let echo itself drift, like incense rising unseen. Yet always beneath, memory of Rome lingered. Stones reused in walls, roads beneath cobbles, aqueducts standing broken beyond fields. People named ruins the old city, wandered among arches, wondered at columns. Legends whispered, giants built them, or lost peoples, or gods. Rome's ghost walked still, silent but present. And so, new cities lived above old, not erasing, but layering. Pause once more. Picture child exploring ruin outside town. Grass high, columns broken, ivy climbing. The child touches stone, cool beneath hand, carved once, now worn. Silence deep, birds calling above. The ruin whispers, faint, endless. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself feels calm here. Not loud, not sharp, but folded into stone. You don't need to trace each column. Let hush itself drift, like ivy climbing slowly. Networks spread further. Hanseatic League rose in north, linking Baltic and North Sea. Italian cities sailed to east, trading with Byzantium, with Levant. Venice, Genoa, Pisa thrived, their ships carrying goods, their markets glowing. Cities became powers, shaping kingdoms, waging wars, making peace. From ruins rose influence, from silence came hum of empire reborn in fragments. And so, abandonment gave way to revival. Pause again. Picture Lübeck's docks. Ships creak, sails flap, ropes strain. Merchants shout, barrels roll, gulls cry. Smell, salt, air, tar, fish. Bells toll from church above, calling prayer amid trade. Silence of ruin replaced by roar of sea, hum of port. If you're still listening, notice how flow feels endless here. Not fleeting, not jagged, but folded into waves, into gulls, into bells. You don't need to follow each ship. Let tide itself drift, like breath steady, yet fragility remained. Plague would come, fires would burn, wars would rage. Cities could rise, but also fall. And still, beyond ruins of Rome endured, reminders of past order, past silence. Medieval cities were new, yet never free from shadow of old. Pause once more. Picture night over Florence. Torches glow, bells toll, Arno flows dark. Streets quiet, shutters closed, silence pressing. Above, cathedral dome glows faint, spire points skyward. Beneath, stones of Roman road lie buried, silent, forgotten, yet still there. If you're still listening, notice how layers feel endless here. Not erased, not abrupt, but folded, century upon century. You don't have to keep each layer. Let silence itself drift, like water flowing unseen, and you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved, like dawn over market. Did those who bargained in fairs, who prayed in cathedrals, who ruled in councils? No, they walked atop ruins of empire. Or did they simply feel bread in hand, coin in palm, smoke in lungs? Silence of bells, pressing close, steady, endless, folded into centuries of change. Asterisk, you hear silence again, but it is not the silence of forest or cloister. It is the silence of stone lying bare, arches half fallen, streets overgrown with grass. A crow calls from atop a crumbled wall, its voice echoing into emptiness. Wind sighs through gaps once filled with marble statues, once lined with colonnades. The city lies abandoned still, but not forgotten. Pause here. Smell dust warmed by sun. Touch rough stone worn smooth by time. See ivy climbing slowly upward. The ruin stands not as home, but as memory, for villagers passing, for monks copying texts, for pilgrims wandering. Ruins whispered, "This was once empire." If you're still listening, notice how quiet feels heavy here. Not empty, not sharp, but folded with centuries. You don't need to keep each image. Let silence itself drift, like shadow moving across wall by Middle Ages ruins-filled Europe. Amphitheaters stood roofless, their tears grazed by goats. Baths crumbled, their mosaics fading beneath moss. Temples collapsed, their columns carted away. Bridges broken, aqueducts dry. Yet they remain, scattered like bones, reminders of Rome's reach. People lived beside them, within them, around them. They loomed as monuments, as mysteries, as warnings. And so, abandonment itself became presence. Pause again. Picture shepherd leading flock through Roman Forum, now meadow. Sheep crept grass where senators once debated. Children climbed columns, their laughter echoing where orators once spoke. The silence of empire replaced by a murmur of village, yet stones remain weighty, unyielding. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself feels steady here, not fleeting, not loud, but folded into earth. You don't have to follow each ruin. Let hush itself drift, like grass swaying, legends grow. Some said giants built these stones, others said spirits guarded them. Some believed devils lived in ruins, others believed saints had blessed them. The past was distant, half known, blurred into myth. Latin texts preserved fragments, but to most, ruins were puzzles, both feared and revered. And so, ruins became stories. Pause once more. Picture monk guiding pilgrim through ruin. His torch flickers, shadows leap across cracked walls. He murmurs of martyrs once here, of emperors long gone, of mysteries still unsolved. The pilgrim listens, the silence pressing, the air cool, the ruin vast. If you're still listening, notice how imagination itself feels calm here. Not sharp, not harsh, but folded into shadow. You don't need to hold each tale. Let whisper itself drift, like torch smoke fading. Sometimes ruins served as quarries. Stones carted away, reused in walls, in churches, in castles. Yet memory lingered, faint, stubborn. Even when broken, stones carried weight. Even when buried, roads remained beneath. Even when erased, names endured in whispers. And so, Rome survived, not an empire, but an echo. Pause again. Picture mason prying marble from collapsed temple. His hammer rings, echoing in emptiness. Cart creaks, horses strain. The marble will adorn church nearby, the old sanctifying new, the silence of ruin broken, yet folded into prayer. If you're still listening, notice how transformation feels gentle here. Not violent, not rushed, but folded into continuity. You don't need to recall each stone. Let echo itself drift, like hammer fading in air. But ruins were not just memory. They were warnings. People saw grandeur fallen, wealth wasted, power broken. They wondered, could such fall again? Was empire itself fragile? Was glory fleeting? Silence pressed, questions lingered. Pause once more. Picture scholar sitting by ruin, parchment open, quill scratching. He studies texts, he gazes at stone, he wonders at past. The silence around him is heavy, filled with thought, with awe, with fear. If you're still listening, notice how reflection itself feels slow here. Not rushed, not jagged, but folded into centuries. You don't have to answer each question. Let hush itself drift, like ink spreading across a page. And so, ruins shaped imagination of Middle Ages. They whispered of empire lost, of grandeur fleeting, of silence inevitable. They warned kings. They inspired monks. They unsettled villagers. Abandonment itself became teacher, shadow, presence. Pause again. Picture twilight over ruin. Columns glow red in fading sun. Shadows stretch long, wind sighs through arches. Birds wheel overhead. Silence deepens. The ruin stands, vast, empty, enduring. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels folded here. Past within present, silence within sound. You don't need to keep each stone. Let glow itself drift, like dusk falling, and you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved. Like moonlight on broken wall, did those who walked past ruins, who reused stones, who whispered legends, know they lived amid memory of empire? Or did they simply feel grass beneath feet, wind on face, silence pressing close, endless, steady, folded into centuries of change? Asterisk, you hear bells tolling again, not from crowded city, but from church built within ruins of Rome. Their sound spreads across fields, echoing through arches half fallen, vibrating against stone that once housed gods of empire. The silence of abandonment mingles with chant of prayer, with incense curling upward. Here, ruin is not only memory, it is sanctified, folded into faith. Pause here. Picture candlelight flickering against ancient column, Christian altar raised upon pagan foundation. Smell beeswax, hear chant, see shadow stretch across cracked mosaic. The ruin is not erased, but transformed. For those kneeling, it is holy space, ancient and new. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere itself feels layered here. Not abrupt, not harsh, but folded into centuries of devotion. You don't have to follow each stone. Let glow itself drift, like incense rising unseen dot. Across Europe, churches stood within ruins. Basilicas converted, temples reshaped, theaters walled into chapels. Monks reused columns, masons carved crosses into marble, priests preached beneath Roman arches. Ruins became vessels of faith, not abandoned, but redeemed. Asterisk, and so, Rome lived on not in empire, but in sanctity. Pause again. Picture pilgrim entering ruin-turned church. He kneels, whispers prayer, touches stone cool beneath hand. He feels centuries pressing emperor's grandeur, saint's silence, his own need. Above, candle flames quiver, bells toll faint. Outside, ruins stretch, empty. Inside, spirit stirs, alive. If you're still listening, notice how devotion itself feels calm here. Not fierce, not hurried, but folded into hush. You don't need to trace each prayer. Let chant itself drift, like echo fading in vault. Artists, too, drew from ruins. Painters imagined Rome's fall. Sculptors carved saints in poses once given to emperors. Poets sang of crumbling walls. Ruins became symbols of vanity, of mortality, of divine will. To see fallen city was to see warning, but also beauty. Ivy on column, moss on stone, arch half collapsed, all spoke in image, in metaphor, in art, and so ruins entered imagination. Pause once more. Picture monk illuminating manuscript. His brush paints city crumbling, flames slicking walls, people fleeing. Around it, he draws saints standing firm, cross raised. The ruin becomes lesson, not just history. The silence becomes teaching, folded into art. If you're still listening, notice how imagination itself feels steady here. Not loud, not fleeting, but folded into pigment, into page. You don't have to recall each image. Let color itself drift like light across parchment. Pilgrims carried stories too. They told of ruins where martyrs died, where saints preached, where miracles lingered. They walked through broken arches as if through scripture. Silence spoke to them of fragility, of divine judgment, of eternity. Ruins became sermons without words, folded into landscape. Pause again. Picture twilight pilgrimage. Candles flicker, footsteps echo on stone. Voices chant. They pass through ruin, arches framing sky, silence pressing. The ruin itself feels sacred, as if stone remembers. If you're still listening, notice how stillness itself feels holy here. Not sharp, not empty, but folded into faith. You don't need to follow each chant. Let hush itself drift, like stars appearing. Kings and lords claimed ruins too, not just for stone, but for symbolism. To rule from ruin was to claim past, twofold empire into new authority. Castles rose beside amphitheaters, halls within forums, chapels in basilicas. Old grandeur lent weight, even broken, even silent. And so, ruin was not only past, it was power. Pause once more. Picture coronation within old basilica. Candles blaze, banners hang, voices chant, crown placed, oath sworn. The ruin unfolds, its silence heavy, its memory vast. Outside, ruins crumble. Inside, new authority glows. If you're still listening, notice how presence itself feels weighty here. Not fleeting, not shallow, but folded into stone. You don't need to follow each vow. Let echo itself drift, like bell fading in distance. Faith wove ruin into vision of time. The fall of Rome became symbol of world's fragility, of divine justice, of kingdom passing. Preachers told of empire humbled, of pride fallen, of eternity beyond. Ruins taught humility, warning of fate awaiting all. Pause again. Picture preacher in ruin, voice rising against broken wall. He speaks of empire fallen, of pride judged, of heaven awaiting. Listeners shiver, silence pressing, ruin looming. If you're still listening, notice how lesson itself feels calm here. Not urgent, not sharp, but folded into hush. You don't need to hold each word. Let silence itself drift like wind, sighing. And so, faith, art, imagination transformed ruins. They were no longer empty. They were sacred, symbolic, warning, beautiful. Abandonment itself became folded into devotion, into creativity, into awe. Pause once more. Picture dawn over ruin-turned church. Bells toll, smoke rises, birds wheel. Columns gleam faint in light. Ivy glows green. Windows blaze with colored glass. Silence lingers, but softened, folded into song. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels endless here. Not abrupt, not harsh, but folded into prayer, into stone. You don't need to trace each century. Let glow itself drift, like sun breaking horizon, and you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved, like candle burning low. Did those who knelt in ruined basilicas, who painted fall of Rome, who preached among crumbling walls? No, they lived amid history, Or did they simply feel wax melting, incense curling, silence pressing close, steady, endless, folded into centuries of faith? Asterisk, you hear footsteps again, soft against stone, overgrown with moss. A scholar walks slowly through broken arches, his cloak brushing weeds, his hand trailing across cool marble. Birds flutter overhead, wind sighs through gaps. The silence is heavy, yet not empty. For him, each column whispers, each fragment speaks. The ruin is no longer just memory or warning. It is possibility. Pause here. Picture ivy curling upward, sunlight filtering through cracks, insects humming in shadow. Smell earth damp from rain. Feel stone rough beneath palm. The ruin stands still, yet minds begin to stir. What once was lost might yet be reborn. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere itself feels patient here. Not abrupt, not sharp, but folded into centuries. You don't need to keep each detail. Let hush itself drift, like leaves rustling by later Middle Ages. Carried not only fear, but curiosity. Scholars studied them, monks copied texts within them, artists sketched their forms. Fragments of Rome became sources of wonder. What knowledge lay hidden? What art forgotten? What wisdom could be recovered? Silence of abandonment became seed of renewal. And so, ruins turned gaze forward as well as back. Pause again. Picture student in cloister library, unrolling parchment, copied from Roman texts. He traces words, faint and fragile, lit by candle. Outside, ruin stands, its arches dark. Inside, mind stirs, memory awakens. The silence folds into thought. If you're still listening, notice how reflection itself feels gentle here. Not rushed, not fleeting, but folded into light of candle. You don't have to follow each word. Let glow itself drift like wax melting. Merchants too noticed ruins. Roads still guided trade. Bridges still spanned rivers. Aqueducts still shaped land. Even broken, they directed life. Cities grew again where ruins lay, their markets forming in old forums, their churches rising in basilicas, their walls tracing Roman lines. Abandonment shaped rebirth, silence guiding sound. Pause once more. Picture medieval Florence rising around Roman walls. Narrow streets follow ancient path. Timber houses lean against crumbling stone. Cathedral grows where temple once stood. Bells toll, market hums, ruin enfolds. If you're still listening, notice how continuity itself feels calm here. Not loud, not forced, but folded into rhythm. You don't have to remember each stone. Let hum itself drift like water running. Artists felt all, too. They painted ruins in margins, carved fragments into facades, wove Rome into vision of beauty. Broken arches became symbols of time, of eternity, of grandeur, possible again. They looked on ruins not just as loss, but as models, as inspiration. And so, ruin was not only shadow, but spark. Pause again. Picture painter sketching crumbled column. His hand moves quick, charcoal dark against parchment. Behind him, ruin looms, silent, vast. Before him, image forms, beauty reborn. If you're still listening, notice how imagination itself feels soft here. Not frantic, not fleeting, but folded into hush. You don't have to keep each line. Let shadow itself drift like ink drying. Travelers told tales of ruins. Pilgrims described wonders of Rome. Merchants spoke of arches still standing. Scholars marveled at texts found. Stories spread, weaving ruins into dream. And dream itself seeded desire to know more, to recover, to rise again. Pause once more. Picture evening fire in tavern. Voices murmur of ruins seen, arches high, stones vast. Listeners lean close. Fire crackles, shadows flicker. Outside, night presses, silence deep. Inside, imagination glows, steady. If you're still listening, notice how story itself feels gentle here. Not demanding, not urgent, but folded into ember. You don't have to hold each tale. Let warmth itself drift, like smoke curling by 13th and 14th centuries. Interests sharpened. Universities studied law of Rome, architecture of ruins, texts of empire. Thinkers asked, what had fallen? What might be restored? Kings looked to empire as model, popes to Rome as heritage, artists to ruins as teachers. Silence no longer warned, alone it invited. And so, ruins became bridges. Pause again. Picture scholar copying Vitruvius, tracing lines of architecture. His quill scratches, candle flickers, shadow deep. Outside, ruin looms, silent yet instructive. Inside, knowledge stirs, folded into ink. If you're still listening, notice how patience itself feels calm here. Not sharp, not fleeting, but folded into page. You don't have to follow each word. Let hush itself drift, like breath slowing. Even common folk felt ruin's weight. They told legends, built homes within walls, grazed animals among columns. For them, ruin was not study, but life. Yet still, its presence pressed, reminding of past, of change, of fragility. Pause once more. Picture shepherd, leaning against fallen arch. His flock grazes, his eyes wander sky. Stone looms above, silent, vast. He feels small, yet steady. Silence folds around him, endless. If you're still listening, notice how quiet itself feels grounding here. Not empty, not harsh, but folded into breath. You don't need to recall each stone. Let stillness itself drift, like cloud passing. And so, abandonment became foundation for renewal. From silence came thought. From ruin came art. From past came future. By 15th century, Renaissance stirred, and ruins became teachers, models, guides. But in Middle Ages, they were first echoes, first seeds, folded into faith, into imagination, into slow recovery. Pause again. Picture dawn over Colosseum in 14th century. Sunlight strikes arches, shadows retreat, birds wheel, grass grows thick, goats graze, children play. Yet scholar stands, gazing upward, awe in eyes. Silence folds around, yet promise glows. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels endless here. Not abrupt, not fleeting, but folded into dawn. You don't have to keep each moment. Let glow itself drift, like sun warming stone. And you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved, like whisper of wind through broken arch. Did those who studied ruins, who painted fragments, who prayed in basilicas built on temples, know they stood at threshold of rebirth? Or did they simply feel stone beneath hand, grass beneath feet, silence pressing close, steady, endless, folded into centuries of waiting? Good night, Sing Sing. Sing Sing, Sing Sing, Sing Sing, sweet dreams.